Good morning, everyone. My name is Christina Van Sickle, and I'm the Director of Professional Practice at the college. I'd like to thank you for joining us for the Keynote discussion panel, Supporting Clients with Care and Competence Through Intimate Partner Violence. Please note that this panel discussion will include information about intimate partner violence, including physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, and systemic and structural racism and oppression. Please take care while watching this discussion and seek support if needed. And a note that in the discussion, a lot of knowledge will be shared will reference individuals who identify as women. This is not to ignore the realities that intimate partner violence impacts everyone, not just those who identify as women. It's simply the reality of the professional experiences of the panelists. But before I introduce the panelists for today's session, I first have a few housekeeping items. If you require assistance, there's a help section for tech support at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. You can click on the help icon to connect with our live support. There will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the panel. You can submit your questions through the chat feature on the right-hand side of the session page on the virtual portal. Questions will be read aloud for the presenters to respond. And before we begin, I just wanted to provide a little context for our conversation today. College registrants will be aware that since 2017, almost every year, the college has received and informed registrants about recommendations from the Domestic Violence Death and Review Committee. And this committee assists the Office of the Chief Coroner to investigate and review deaths of persons that occur as a result of domestic violence and make recommendations to help prevent such deaths in future circumstances. And the Domestic Violence Death and Review Committee, also known as the DVDRC, they basically do a root cause analysis that includes looking at community and systemic responses to identify possible points of intervention that could assist in the prevention of domestic homicide in the future. And so since 2017, the college has heard from the DVDRC that they wanted us to let our registrants know about the links between depression, suicidal ideation, domestic violence, substance use, and family violence and coercive and control dynamics, and that these can be risk factors for domestic homicide. And our latest publication about this issue came out in August of this year. And the college received feedback from registrants that they wanted to have more information and resources to help support clients who are navigating this issue. And so this is what this panel hopes to do today, is to provide some more information and support for registrants who are supporting clients navigating this topic. And about that, we realize that when looking at this issue, there's a lot of different terminology that can be used. For the purpose of this panel, as indicated in our title today, we're going to be using intimate partner violence, or its acronym IPV. So all of that being said, let's begin the panel discussion. I'm so pleased to introduce you to all of our panelists. Karishma Firdausi is the Policy Analyst with the Information and Privacy Commissioner. Catherine Grimes is a senior Catherine Grice, my apologies, is a Senior Health Policy Advisor with the Information and Privacy Commissioner. Marilyn Payunin is the Branch Manager at the Ontario Native Women's Association. Bernice Rizitnik is a social worker whose counseling work focuses on Northern Indigenous communities. And Darrell Williams is a private practitioner social worker. And you can read the full biographies of our panelists on the virtual portal. And just welcome to all of our panelists, and thank you very much for being here with us today.
Thank you.
So, as noted, I gave some examples of trends and risks that were presented by the DVDRC to the college, but the college isn't the only organization that receives similar recommendations. So Catherine and Karishma, I was wondering if you could speak to the recommendations that the Information and Privacy Commissioner, also known as the IPC, another acronym for us today. I understand that you've also received some recommendations from the Office of the Chief Coroner, and I was wondering if you could speak to us about that.
Yeah, so first, thank you, Christina, the college, for inviting the Office of the Information and Privacy Commissioner of Ontario, or the IPC, to participate in the Education Forum today. So Catherine and I are here to speak to how Ontario's privacy laws can be a mechanism to prevent and mitigate IPV through multi-sectoral collaboration and partnership through the lawful sharing of personal information and personal health information. So before I speak to the coroner's inquest, I think it would be probably helpful for the panel and the registrants to provide a brief overview of the IPC's mandate, just to get a sense of why there was a jury recommendation directed to our office. So the IPC provides oversight over Ontario's privacy laws. Relevant to the registrants for the event today is the Personal Health Information and Protection Act. So collectively, these privacy laws establish the rules for how Ontario's public sector organizations, including healthcare providers, may collect, use, and disclose either personal information or personal health information. It also includes the right of access to records containing their information, and also ensuring that these records remain private and secure under the custodian or control of the institution or public sector organization. So getting into the coroner's inquest, in 2022, our office received the verdict from the coroner's inquest into the deaths of Carol Culleton, Anastasia Kuzik, and Natalie Warmerdam due to intimate partner violence. This inquest took place in Renfrew County. So there were several dozen recommendations that the jury provided to the Government of Ontario, the Government of Canada, and of course to our office as well. Specifically, jury recommendation 78 called on the IPC to work in partnership with the Domestic Violence Death Review Committee and other partners to develop a plain language tool to empower IPV professionals to make informed decisions about privacy, confidentiality, and public safety. The Information and Privacy Commissioner of Ontario, Patricia Kassim, readily agreed to carry out this critically important recommendation. So through several consultations and discussions with professionals that provide services to either victims and survivors or perpetrators of IPV, our office was made aware that individuals feel constrained from sharing information due to perceived constraints and barriers set by Ontario's privacy laws. In some cases, individuals within their professional capacity feel conflicted about how to respond to an emergency or crisis because a victim or survivor's privacy seems to be at odds with their safety. So, of course, there is no question that the decision to share information without the victim or perpetrator's consent is extremely difficult, and it requires a reasoned judgment call. The decision on a case-by-case basis with whoever is responsible, be that a social worker, a parole officer, a staff from a women's shelter. It takes a lot of deliberation, and a lot of discretion must be exercised, often very quickly, and sometimes with not even the full picture at hand. So given this, our guide will clarify that while protecting personal information and personal health information from unauthorized collection, use, and disclosure is essential, privacy must not and should not be used as an excuse to prevent the lawful sharing of vital, and in some cases, life-saving information, particularly where an individual may be at risk of IPV. So specifically, our guide will clarify how to lawfully share information based on the privacy laws where an individual is at risk of IPV. So in terms of the audience of this guide, of course, we know that there's a lot of different professions that may be providing services to clients, whether that's the victim or survivor or the perpetrator of IPV. With that, the guide is tailored to professionals within the justice sector, so police officers, the Crown, institutions with the Government of Ontario, the healthcare sector, and of course, community-based IPV service providers, which are unique because they're actually not governed under Ontario's privacy laws. So our guide is going to provide best practices around sharing information with those considerations in mind, grounded in the law, but also in terms of what we and collectively the consensus is around sharing information. So we have consulted with partners across each of these three sectors, currently on the first draft of the guide. There's been a considerable amount of interest and support in this guide, and it is our hope from the regulator's perspective to ensure that the guide can be used to inform decision-making on whether to share information for the safety and well-being of victims and survivors, and also holding perpetrators to account for these injustices. So for now, I'll leave it there. I'm really excited to be a part of this panel and look forward to the conversation.
Yes, and I'll just add, I'm Karishma's colleague at the Office of the Information and Privacy Commissioner, and she set the scene, and a little bit later I'll go into some more detail about the health sector in particular and some important parts of the legislation to keep in mind.
Excellent. Thank you both for that. And I think it really brings up such an important point that there needs to be kind of a systemic approach to this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think, when we do drill down that our registrants are part of the system, and where we often are acting, our registrants are often acting is assessing individuals who are experiencing IPV. And so I'd really like to ask the other panelists if you could comment on if there's specific assessment tools or questions that clients need to be asked when considering IPV. And I'm going to start with Marilyn Bernice Durrell.
Sounds good. Good morning, everybody. I want to just say thank you for having me here. We don't use a specific tool, but in some of the frontline work that we provide with my staff, some of the questions that were brought forward are they safe to talk right now? How can we help them, as this is going to be their plan? Have there been any recent incidents of intimate partner violence? Is there a history of intimate partner violence? And how long has this been occurring? Are you residing and currently involved with your partner? Have you fled your abuser? Are you planning to exit? Because 9 times out of 10, it starts with a phone call. So it's a matter of just starting this discussion to ensure that they're safe right now. Ask if there's a plan to exit. What forms of intimate partner violence have they experienced? Have present or historic incidents of intimate partner violence been reported to police services? Are there charges? Are there any current no contact orders, peace bonds, probation and or parole, etc.? Who is the partner? Their date of birth. Get as much information from the perp as you can. Where's the partner now? Are there children involved? Is there child welfare involvement as a result of any historic IPV? Who are the current supports with their family or friends or anybody, other community service providers that they want to have in place? And that's what I have so far. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. Bernice?
Okay. Thank you for having me here. And for my piece, it's kind of different because I work with First Nations, and there's hardly any services there, any resources. So when somebody calls me and there's intimate partner violence, and then same thing, I asked the same question Marilyn asking, the one she presented, but the first question I usually ask is, are you safe?
Mm-hmm.
And if I try, are you safe? Or is your partner? Or are the kids safe? Do you have a place to go? I can't say, I'll bring you out because there's no place to go.
Mm.
Bringing a family, a woman and her children out to Thunder Bay, there's no place to put them. There's no resources. The women's shelters are full. There's no, like in Red Lake, Dryden, and any other place, they're full.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so hard because they're stuck on a reserve and they want to get out, and there's nowhere for me to take them.
Mm-hmm.
So they're stuck there. There's no place for them to go. So they just keep in contact with me.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I tell them, well, you have to go to you have to be safe. Can you go to your parents' home? Well, he's going to come there.
Mm-hmm.
So I just say, well, go to your parents' home and I'll call the police to check up on you. I'll call the chief and council to make sure you're safe. Well, his relative is the chief. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of those logistics. So it's hard, and it's hard to bring them out. There's nowhere, and it's hard to try and work with them on a reserve, but it's hard because like I said, there's no resources, so that's what I have to work with, right? And so that's what I do. I keep them safe. I use the resources in the community as much as I can. And like I said, in non-community, there's lots. I think there's 48. And those are the communities I work with. and there's a lot of IPV there, and I work with a lot of clients. I work with a lot of Indigenous clients because I speak my language, and I work with a lot of elders, and elders get abused too. I mean, from their partners. And what do I do with them? I can't bring them to Thunder Bay because they don't speak English and they can't live by themselves. So it's like, what do I do with a 60-year-old, 70-year-old that's getting abused? I've been in that situation before. And I have to work with the community. I have to work with the family. I have to work with the resources. And you know what? It's something that's not, it's something that some communities are not open to it. Like even with the sexual abuses, it's not, I go there and I said, well, the kid disclosed sexual abuse. I got to call the police. And I got to call the chief and council. I got to open a whole investigation. And I used to work in child welfare. So that's the stuff I work with, right? I don't have many resources, and I'm just one person. And if I try and, like I said, there's like me and Marilyn, we work in Thunder Bay. There's Beamed again, and there's Faye Peterson, woman shelter. They have a long waiting list.
They're always full.
And if we bring women out there, there's a lot of they get into trouble sometimes. Their kids get apprehended, so it's like the whole world against them. But we're trying to help them, and sometimes we're not successful. And that's a sad story, and that's because of colonialism. Because we're like trauma, right? My mom went to residential school, so I live with that trauma. But you know what? I overcame it. I'm trying to overcome it by becoming a social worker. So anybody can overcome it. You can become successful. All we live with as Aboriginal people, we can overcome it. We can become successful. So that's what I tell people. Like all these women that I work with that are getting abused, you can become successful. You can tell your story. I can tell my story. I can help people, and that's why I do this work. I was a victim of intimate partner violence, and I overcame it. I almost got killed. I have lots of scars because of the abuse. I don't hate him. I overcame it. I went on my healing journey, and that is what helped me. So anybody can overcome it. And all these women I helped, they thank me. And I just want to continue helping them get better. But we need help with the resources up north. Because, with the intimate partner violence, they're attempting suicide. They're trying to, they're into drugs. When I was being abused, I attempted suicide. My heart stopped. But the doctor, he brought me back. So, you know what? There's a reason for me. Creator brought me back to do this work. The doctor said you were gone for a few minutes. And then that's why I pray. I pray to Creator that thank you, miigwech every day. I thank Him for I have had a rough life, losing family members through addiction, and that's that's what happens when the legacy of residential schools, trauma after. But, Creator is with us and will continue to guide me. And I'm so thankful to be here and, to say my prayer this morning, miigwech gazemando. And that's why I wanted to be here, to be thankful. And it's very important to me about intimate partner violence because I lived it. And I don't have hate. I don't have hate what happened to me. And I want to continue to share with other women and other people. And I have. And it's not only intimate partner violence, it's sexual abuse, it's rape, that happened to me. I don't hate anybody. And you, if it happens to you, you can overcome it and live a good life. And I have a good life. I love my family. I love my community, and I love where I live. And I just want to help people. That's what I want to do. And where I come from, Sandy Lake, we always say Sandy Lake strong. So that's what I want to share. I talk too long.
Miigwech.
Miigwech. Thank you for sharing your story with us, Bernice. We really feel honored. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing, Bernice. And good morning, everyone. I just wanted to also follow up on what Marilyn and Bernice said in terms of the questions to ask. Safety, of course, is paramount in asking about their safety. But one thing to note, being a practitioner in private practice, and I practice psychotherapy, usually when survivors come to me, they're either they've already left the relationship and are safe, or they're unaware of their risk, or reluctant to disclose that they're at risk of harm. And so in addition to these questions that are really, really helpful, and some of the questions that Marilyn pointed to as well, they can be found in an assessment tool called the Danger Assessment. And the majority of these questions are in that tool. But as part of the assessment too, I have to pay attention to what they're not saying and maybe implying. So again, if they're coming to me and they're not aware of or reluctant to disclose that they're at risk of harm, I have to look at the nonverbals, what their body language is saying when they're talking about home life or their partner. If they suddenly decided to be off camera, if we're virtual, when we usually have a video session and they're choosing to be off camera, if they're opting for a phone session instead. So these are also part of the safety assessment. And it's not simple, because now as a practitioner who may be aware of the risks, to ask these questions may prompt them to engage change, which can also place them at risk, because their change in behavior may also escalate the power. It's disrupting the power control dynamic. And so as part of the assessment and the conversations that we would have with survivors is to, as a provider, build safety in our relationship, as well as collaborate with other resources so that, when we are sending them out, as Bernice said, there's actually support there, that if they're changing in their disposition and their behaviors and they're becoming more empowered, that they actually have the support that's out there to meet their needs. So those are some of the additional factors to consider as well when we're doing assessments.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any of the other panelists want to comment further on the assessment piece? Okay, no problem. So now, again, looking at the practitioners to offer us some specific insights from your practice settings and work with clients. And I've got specific questions for each of you. And so, Bernice, you've already touched on this a fair amount. And I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to add to this. If you could share your insights into helping people on their healing journeys when it comes to IPV.
Okay, I think for the healing journey, I think for what I tell my clients is, I think all you need to do is start talking about what happened to you. And that's part of your healing journey. The courage to start talking about what happened to you, then that's when it really starts your healing journey. Mm-hmm. The courage to start talking. Mm-hmm. And that's when I found mine.
Yeah.
And that's what I tell them. You need to start talking about it. And, it may be baby steps. Mm-hmm. That's what I tell them. You just can't, when I first meet a client, I tell them, I know you're not going to tell me everything. I just meet you for the first time. You're not going to tell me your whole story because we just meet. I said, but the more we spend time together, then you'll start to trust me.
Yeah.
And then I said, then the longer we start meeting, then you'll have the courage to start telling me more. And then that's when your healing really starts. And then I said, you'll be able to tell your own story to other people. Mm-hmm. I said, I have my own story to tell, but that's my story and your story. Because I've had, one time I had a client that, I have lots of elders, and they went to residential school, and they want to tell their story, and they said, we can't tell our story because we don't want to tell our story because we don't have a counselor that speaks their language. Mm. And we don't want to keep repeating it. So I had somebody that was like 6 to 7 years old, and she was abused in residential school when she was 12. So I was the first person she told. Mm. So, and then we built our relationship, and then she started talking about her intimate partner violence relationship she had. So there was a lot of work we needed to do. And during that point, and then she didn't have a good relationship with her kids. They went into care. And then she said, because of her relationship, she had to give up her kids. And then I said, well, maybe it's something you could tell your kids. Mm. I said, I could help you tell your kids why it happened. And then I said, you as a family can start healing together. So, and then she liked that idea. So, it's just start talking about what happened to you and start healing. And for my practice, there's people, we practice our traditions, smudging and stuff, and that's what she wanted to do. And that's what we do, when we start our session, we smudge, and then there's some that want to pray, pray to God. So it's up to that person how they want to start, but most of the time I start with a simple prayer. Mm-hmm. And they seem to like that. I ask them first if that's what they want to do. And I don't force it. I just tell them, I just say like a simple prayer, miigwech, and I just tell them it's part of what I do. So that helps. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I really like that you emphasize the importance of the professional or the therapeutic relationship and creating that safe space, and that takes time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Darrell, I'm wondering if you could tell us a bit about your research and findings regarding how immigrant women experienced and perceived services for IPV, and if or how those findings inform your private practice in areas of racialized trauma.
Right, yes. So I should preface my response by saying that this was done 13 years ago. So it is old research, qualitative research, but since then there has been research done in this area, although not quite enough. And the literature speaks to that there still has to be more done in terms of identifying what the needs of immigrant women are when it comes to survival of intimate partner violence and experiencing services and the work of service providers. In my research, one of the things that stood out in the responses that I got was this idea of being between cultures. And it speaks to the intersectionality of identities and how that can render so many survivors invisible when it comes to having their needs addressed, their safety needs addressed. And it becomes a little bit more complex when there's the systemic factor of immigration and how that constrains the autonomy and mobility of women. So depending on their status, they may not be able to leave as readily. For example, with some women who have just a work permit or study permit, they don't have the luxury of working anywhere or with any organization or, changing a job to increase their income to leave. So those are some of the things that have to be taken into consideration. Some of the responses I got to pertained to their lack of awareness of their own rights, because they may be coming from cultures that don't prioritize, a woman's right to safety and autonomy. And so they may be unaware that they have these rights and unaware that they can seek services. And so when they engage these services, what happens is that there is a lot that's taken for granted that they should have known or should know, and a lot of information doesn't get passed on to them. This speaks to the importance of not only being culturally curious and sensitive, but also being willing to cross-collaborate. I work in private practice, but as a practitioner, as a responsible practitioner, we all should be able to connect with other resources across the board, because there are services that I won't be able to provide. But certainly, if I know people, I'll be able to say, hey, these are the places that you can go. These are the people you can talk to get to have your needs met. So those are some of the main concerns. One other concern that came up is, and again, this is 13 years ago, about one other concern that came up at the time, and even more recent research spoke a bit to this. I think in New Brunswick, there was a study or initiative done in 2017 where they explored this topic as well. The lack of diversity in staff, that has changed over time, but participants said that, well, if they have never experienced what it means to immigrate and go through that process and, be a minority culture or race, then how will they understand what I need? And in the climate that we're in right now, we can recognize that so many people remain invisible or on the margins as a result of that. And so there's that need, again, to be culturally curious and to be willing to learn and connect with others and be open to the experiences of others. Being in this in-between culture, as my participants had said at the time, it's difficult for them because they want to be able to still maintain some of the cultural values that they hold, because that's what connects them to their community, which they need if they want to be safe. But sometimes that gets pushed aside for their safety and for good reason, but it makes it more difficult to leave. Mm-hmm. And so that's the nuance that we also have to keep in mind as we try to support, as service providers try to support survivors.
That's great, yeah. Thank you very much for that. And Marilyn, I'm wondering if you could share thoughts on supporting and advocating for Indigenous women, children, families, and community through the systems level, drawing on your experience leading programs at the Ontario Native Women's Association?
Absolutely. Going off on what Bernice had said, it's about primarily meeting that person where they're at. You know, listening to their story, hearing what they have to say, hearing what their needs are. Because unfortunately, Indigenous women still are experiencing significant barriers amongst systems, as we know. In system navigation, there's issues around racism, discrimination, intimidation, and sadly, in most cases, re-victimization. And again, that regresses the whole plan of safety or plan to exit, which is really, really unfortunate. And again, going off of what Bernice had said as well, Indigenous women deserve services that are culturally rooted. You know, access to elders, access to medicines, traditional healing. And sadly, in these systems, in all those systems, that being justice, justice, child welfare, healthcare, social services, there's a lack of these services when women are involved with these systems, unfortunately. Providing support and advocacy that is with like a walk with approach, not beside, not behind, but walk with the woman. And supporting them and amplifying their voices so that they can be heard and what they have to say is valuable and what they're in addressing their goals and their needs.
Really interesting listening to everyone. The community is such a vital part of this, right? And that this, we really need to be addressing this at a community and a systemic level.
Absolutely.
Right? Further to the systemic level, I'm wondering if I can hear again from Catherine and Karishma. When thinking of solutions to prevent the risk of IPV, can you discuss the relationship between privacy, confidentiality, and public safety, and how privacy laws are not intended to be a barrier to disclose information to prevent IPV risks of harm?
Yes, thank you. I'll get this started. So as other participants have mentioned, you know, trust, building that trust is a huge part of this relationship, and integral to that is privacy. And so our office oversees the privacy laws, as Karishma mentioned. You know, I do have to give a bit of a preface that Karishma and I aren't practitioners in this space. And so we're here to provide general information about the laws that our office oversees. But, you know, when we give presentations and panels like this, we have to say that, you know, we're not providing legal advice right now or drawing conclusions about how the law might pertain to a particular situation. That being said, we do like to provide general information about the laws in case people are not aware or they might want a little refresher. So as Karishma mentioned earlier, our office oversees the laws that have to do with information sharing. So we're just speaking about a small slice of this issue, which is about the flow of information among the people involved in these situations. So we call it information sharing. The law uses the terms disclosing information. So one person disclosing the information and then the other person is collecting it. So the law that I'm going to talk about today in terms of how it's not a complete barrier is PHIPAA, another acronym, the Personal Health Information Protection Act. So the registrants listening today, you're social workers and social service workers, so you might be providing healthcare within the meaning of PHIPAA. And you can go to PHIPAA for the exact definition of that. I'm not going to read it out loud, but it includes work pertaining to someone's physical or mental condition. So the term healthcare is actually pretty broad. So if you are providing healthcare and you are a registrant, you might be a health information custodian under the law, or you might be working for one, in which case you are the custodian's agent. I was looking at the college website and I see that there's a whole very detailed privacy toolkit document explaining PHIPAA in detail. So I won't get into all the nuances of PHIPAA and when it applies, but for the purposes of this conversation right now, let's just assume that, you know, the registrant is a custodian or their agent and that you have the client's personal health information. So let's assume that PHIPAA applies. And so the question is, you have this information and what can you do with it? So important to keep in mind is that one of the purposes of PHIPAA is, in fact, protecting the individual, in this case, the client's privacy, while still enabling healthcare and other important things like public health to happen. And in general, PHIPAA is a consent-based statute, which means that if you as the custodian want to share someone's PHI with someone else, you either have to get that person's consent, or there has to be a specific part of PHIPAA letting you do that sharing, that disclosure, even if you don't have consent. So here's where the part about privacy not being a complete barrier comes in, because built into PHIPAA is the acknowledgement that sometimes information needs to be shared, even if the client is unable to give their consent for that sharing at this moment. PHIPAA, I'll say it again, is not meant to be, shows that privacy is not meant to be a complete barrier to other important ideas like public health and public safety. So for example, PHIPAA allows custodians to disclose PHI and personal health information in certain circumstances, like for specific research projects that already have REB approval, or information to public health units when it's about certain contagious diseases that need to be reported. That information needs to flow, and the law enables that to happen. So, long introduction to say that for purposes of today's discussion and the guide that Karishma and I are working on in our office is, I wanted to highlight an important permitted disclosure in PHIPAA. So PHIPAA specifically says that a custodian may disclose someone's PHI if the custodian believes on reasonable grounds that the disclosure is necessary for the purpose of eliminating or reducing a significant risk of serious bodily harm. And so this idea is an example of why the coroner's inquest jury came to our office, because they want our office to explain to everyone that sometimes people need to be notified about serious risks, even if it does involve disclosing someone's personal health information or personal information. So that's the important takeaway here, that one provision. Of course, there are many other provisions in PHIPAA that allow the custodian to disclose information. For example, if they're required to disclose that information to someone carrying out an investigation that's authorized by law or warrant, or if the disclosure is permitted or required by another law besides PHIPAA. You know, PHIPAA works with the other laws and says, if you are required by another law to report something, yes, you know, go ahead and do that. And so the sharing I'm talking about today, it's permissive, not mandatory. So it's a small distinction, but an important one. I'm not saying that there's a duty to warn or share, just that PHIPAA allows you to do so if you want to, if you have reasonable grounds to share that information. Now, I don't know if the college or different, professional codes of ethics they might have a duty to share, I don't know, but in terms of the law that our office oversees, it's more of, do you have permission under the law to share? So there's a distinction there. And of course, also in PHIPAA, built in is the idea that if you do have to share information, someone's personal information, because it is so sensitive, you should share only as much as is needed to accomplish the purpose. So you're never going to be handing over someone's entire medical file if your purpose is just to warn someone under this one particular provision. So I'm highlighting this provision. There are many others, but this one is the one that I think is the most relevant for today's discussion because, of course, IPV, significant risk of serious bodily harm from the provision, like that goes right to the heart of it. And so I don't know if Karishma has anything she wants to add to this discussion.
That was great, Catherine. I'm not sure if I can add any more, but I'll try. I think one of the key messages really that we want for the registrants to take away is that irrespective of the organization, if you're representing the justice sector, if you're representing the healthcare sector, or if you're a community-based IPV service providers, our offices acknowledges that each of these organizations will have different mandates, they'll have different values, they'll have to abide by different administrative laws, boundaries, and also regulations. But even with these differences, Ontario's privacy law, specifically the ones that the tool will get into, which is the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act and its municipal counterpart, of course, PHIPAA as well, these laws do not prohibit organizations governed under the Act specifically from sharing information about a client, including information about their mental, emotional, or other health conditions to organizations or to individuals who can provide help during an emergency or crisis situation, specifically as it relates to IPV. So if that's the one thing that you can take away from our talk today, we'd be very happy. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And I mean, I can just say too that from the college perspective that our registrants are required to comply with applicable privacy legislation, and that consent is required for the collection, use, and disclosure of client information unless it is required or permitted by law to provide that information without consent. And do just want to let registrants know as well that if you had any privacy questions, you are welcome to consult with the IPC as well, that you can contact their office to consult with them around questions around privacy as well. So just to put that out there. I also wanted to ask our service providers about supporting individuals who are experiencing IPV. And what would you like registrants to know about supporting them? And I think we've already discussed a little bit too about barriers to assessing or getting support for IPV that registrants should consider and be aware of. And this time I'm going to start with Darrell, then Marilyn, and Bernice.
Yes, in terms of barriers, I, compartmentalize it in two sections. One is, the barriers created by the abuse itself. So that could include isolation from formal and informal supports, lack of autonomy, and the stigma and shame that can be created by the experience of abuse that would make survivors or victims reluctant to seek help. So that's one set of barriers. And then you have another set of barriers that are more systemic, related to issues with regard to racism and immigration status, as I mentioned before. So, like I said, depending on their immigration status, they may have limited rights. Their immigration status may also be weaponized against them, further isolating the victims and survivors from resources. There are also biases and misconceptions about race and culture leading to othering of service users. And that it creates a hostile environment for them to thrive because now they're othered and they don't want to seek help from people who may be perpetuating the oppression that they're already experiencing. Of course, this includes a lack of recognition of the intersectionality of service users' identities. And one significant barrier that I've already alluded to, but it's so important to point out, is when we're working in silos. I know sometimes we get bogged down by the administrative part of the work and the doing of the work that can become strenuous. But it constrains service providers from really doing outreach and networking and collaborating, but it can be such a risk to service users. And so my one big encouragement is, especially in a forum like this where people may be even talking in the chat and meeting each other, is to use the opportunity as well to connect with other service providers and get to learn more about their work, so that if you come across a client or a service user who would benefit from these services, that you have some information at the very least to provide to them if you're not able to do so yourself.
That's great. Connections are so key.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Darrell, just in your speaking brought up a really, really valuable point in that, what community needs is wraparound supports.
Yes.
Us as service providers can't be the be all end all. So we need to work together in order to address IPV because, let's face it, it's very prominent.
Yes.
Indigenous women face many, many barriers with respect to accessing services. Mm-hmm. When you think about the lack of services in community in the north, as well as further up north in remote reserves, there is next to nothing. And they have to leave everything that they know and then come to a big urban area, which is Thunder Bay, where we are. And there, unfortunately, as a result, very, very minimal services. Both their shelters are like over capacity. And then again, when people come forth with intimate partner violence, first report is reporting it to police, which many Indigenous women are afraid to do because then that opens the door to child welfare, which again re-victimizes that woman who has already been victimized. There's so many lengthy wait lists for support services, that also with respect to counseling and housing barriers, and then that's not bringing poverty. There's another big contributing factor to many women that are susceptible to IPV. It's just a vicious circle that we as community need to come together to address.
Bernice?
Okay, I'm just going to talk a little bit about barriers on the reserve. Most of the time, it's, I guess, the stigma. You don't want to tell anybody you're getting abused because you don't want anybody to know. And then when you tell somebody, you know, that person might tell somebody else, and then everybody knows, and then it gets worse.
Yeah.
And then you can't do anything. So it happens in most reserves, you know. If your partner finds out, then you get beaten up more.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that happens to most women up north. So you don't say anything. So that's a big barrier. You keep it to yourself if you want to be alive. So that's one of the barriers. And then I guess that's one of the most barriers. And then the other one is you can't get out. You can't leave the reserve. It's hard to get out because it's a fly-in community. And then you phone the shelter, there's no room. So that's another barrier. So it's just hard when you live up north. So that's one of the things that I find when I'm working with a woman. It's just they can't leave, and then you just try and figure out what to do. So those are just the barriers that, and what Marilyn talked about.
Can I just add on to that? You just made me think of something very valuable, which is becoming more of a norm that we see for women trying to escape, is when they do call the shelter, they will share their story. So they have to put everything out on the table. Service providers will listen and then say, sorry, we don't have any beds, which really, really impacts the women, and they feel defeated. What am I supposed to do now? And then they're scared then again to reach out for help again, fear for being rejected, which is very unfortunate.
It is. Picking up on that thread, is there something that we think, you know, we could talk to registrants about how to have those conversations with their clients? Because, you know, you talked about stigma, Bernice, and Marilyn, you've talked about when they are reaching out for help, and no help is available, right? So what are strategies that we can equip our registrants with about how to have those conversations with clients? And Marilyn, I'll go to you.
Okay, so first of all, I would always, number one, make sure they're safe. Make sure it's a comfortable environment. Make sure if they choose to want to have supports there. Ensure culture, make sure there's medicines, offer that, see what their interests are. They can have additional supports there. If they have other service providers, make sure you bring them on board, because there's more power in numbers. And let's face it, like I said, this is not work that can be conquered on our own. Ensuring time for debriefing for all people involved, because at times, you know, sharing this information is very heavy. And we also, as service providers, have to be, you know, aware of vicarious trauma as well. Offering, you know, offering for refreshments or snacks, depending on where you are room-wise. Let's see here. Obviously, a safe and private confidential setting. Use of, like I said, elders sharing circles, sometimes using our feathers or our rocks or our sharing sticks, or, you know, something that can help, and, you know, because these conversations are difficult. And also sharing other resource information as well. You know, it's been mentioned a few times now. Like I said, if it's not something that your service can directly provide, ensure you have alternate resources to, you know, refer that survivor to ensure that they're supported.
What was the question?
When you're faced with the obstacle of, you know, having a lack of resources, with the stigma, clients not wanting to discuss this with us, when they are reaching out to receive help and then no help is available, what are maybe some strategies that we could tell the college registrants who are watching, you know, that they could have these conversations with clients? What needs to be in place in order to have these supportive conversations?
Okay. you need to be there. You need to be there and to be available. You need to be there to be available for the client. And I guess it's up to what the client needs. Like for myself, I always find, okay, I ask the client, what do they need? Sometimes it's just, okay, I want a cup of coffee and let's talk. And it's up to them. I ask them, okay, what do you need? I want to have a coffee. I want to have a tea. And then I want to sit for a bit. And then then we'll talk. And then sometimes it might be, most of the time for me, it's talking in our language.
Yeah.
That's what they find comfort in. So most of my clients, the clients I see, we all talk in our language. So, and that takes a long time. Like an old lady might talk half an hour. So I might talk back half an hour. So it's like, okay, the hour's up. And so that's how I talk to them, and that's how I am available to them. But it might not work for other people because they don't talk their language. But that's how I do my sessions, and that's not might not work for other people. But you just have to find how other people do their own.
What works for them?
What works for them. What works with their client. What works for the person. Because every individual is different.
Yeah.
That's what I found out. Every person is different. Like, even for me, when I went for counseling, I'm different. And the person who's counseling me, I don't like doing things like that, I told him. And you know what? He was fine with it. So every person is different. You have to feel comfortable in what you're doing. Like I told my counselor, he was all like, that was years ago, right? Must be 10, 15 years old, 20 years. But it was almost like, okay, you sit there, I sit there, we look at each other. But I'm like, this doesn't work for me. I said, can we do it a little different way? I said, I'm like, as a Native person, I said, we can't, we weren't allowed to be eye contact with people, right? When we were growing up. So I said, we weren't allowed. So I can't be looking at you. So that's how I grew up. So that's how other people are. Like even when I do counseling, they don't really connect with me. And I told them, it's okay. You don't have to look at me. You can talk to me. And that's our culture. And that's what I told that guy. When he was looking at me right in the eye, I said, you can't do that to me. I can't look at you. But that's our culture. That's how we grew up. And today, I tell people, you don't have to look at me, but we can talk to each other because I understand that. And they understand. So that's one of the reasons, like when I went to counseling 20 years ago, and then, I get scared when people look at me. Not today, but 20 years ago.
You felt like you were in trouble.
It was like, I know I can't do that kind of counseling 20 years ago, but today I'm fine with people looking at me. Like I can look at people in the eye. But before, I couldn't. And today, people I counsel, they're like that. They don't look at me in the eye. But I told them it's fine. You don't have to. You can look anywhere you want, but we will talk. Mm-hmm. And that's how they grew up too. And that's part, like I said, our culture, and everybody is different. So
that's really great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Darrell?
Yes, no, thank you. I just wanted to pick up on something that Bernice shared as well, the importance of bringing your authentic self into the room. I think I operate from a philosophy that if I'm not being authentic, my client will not be. I can't encourage my client to be authentic with me, and there's some safety in that because they know what they're getting is real, and they can feel comfortable in sharing their story because I'm being genuine with it as well. So that's really, really important. The other thing to note is that even in that setting, there is still a perceived power dynamic happening, and we have to be mindful of that. And so I really like what Bernice said in terms of just meeting the client where they are. You know, they share what they share. They may not be ready to leave. They may not even be aware that they're at risk. And so meeting them where they are gives them the latitude to take charge of their own journey. And of course, you know, considering any risk factors in terms of safety and making the connections that you need to, but being also patient with their journey, because they may not be at the stage of readiness where you're thinking, okay, you need to, you know, get out right away. They're not there yet. And so being able to walk alongside them, as you said, Marilyn, and being patient with their journey and supporting them with that is key. You know, keeping in mind that there is that power dynamic that needs to be, we need to be aware of that. And one final thing is building awareness. Like I said, a lot of the times I've had clients who, until they hear it from someone else, they don't realize that they are experiencing abuse. And in many cases, it's usually emotional and psychological or even financial abuse. It's not the obvious, you know, black and blue bruises that you'd see. And so not until they hear it from a third party and they're getting an opportunity to step outside of the experience for a minute that they realize, oh my gosh, I'm actually experiencing that. And so helping to build that awareness is also really, really helpful. And these conversations take time because it does take time for them to process. It's a whole new way of thinking. When a person is experiencing abuse, it's a mind shift and a whole psychological change. And so it takes time to support them through that as they experience that change. So those are some of the key factors I would consider.
Those are great takeaways. You know, I'm reflecting, listening to everyone talking about how to support clients and how it's so important to start where the clients are at, to tailor your strategy and approaches for their individuality.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? Mm-hmm. And to be very patient and to be available. Yes. Right? And so it's interesting listening to the different perspectives that seems to be a common threads that run throughout all of them. I'm going to ask our final question of the day, and I'm going to ask it to all of our panelists. And I'm just curious about two things. One is there anything else that you wanted to impart that you didn't have the opportunity to do so? And two, is there places where you could tell registrants about where they could get more information if they wanted to? So I'm going to start over here with Karishma and Catherine, and then we'll just work our way around the table.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to add a bit more. You did mention that registrants and anyone in the public in Ontario really is welcome to contact the IPC. There are a couple different ways to do that. If you have general questions about privacy, you can email info@IPC, or even before that, you can go to our website. We have a number of guides, not just about the health sector, about all the legislation we oversee, about privacy and confidentiality. And in terms of meeting people where they're at, one thing our office has been trying to do in recent years is make our materials more reader-friendly because, the average Ontarian or average practitioner doesn't necessarily have the time or inclination to read through a bunch of legal jargon, and at a certain point they could just read the legislation itself. So we, our public outreach and educational section of the agency, of the office, is really trying to make privacy more approachable and just raise awareness about it among both the general public and the practitioners. So any questions about privacy or access to information, check out our website and it'll have the contact information there.
Yes, and just to put a pin on that as well, we are here to obviously socialize the idea that we are working on the Intimate Partner Violence Plain Language tool, and I think I would be amiss by not inviting registrants, this excellent panel, to connect with us and to provide feedback on the content of the tool and ensuring that, it is plain language, that we are getting the spirit and intent of Jury Recommendation 78 with the tool, which is essentially to empower professionals across these different sectors, to empower their clients, to ensure that their privacy, confidentiality, and of course, their public safety is being met through the tool. And of course, we would love for people in the audience, people in this room to connect with us. You can find our contact information on ipc.on.ca. We'd be really, really privileged to honestly have you guys provide feedback, review, validate. It'd be really beneficial to us, and of course it'd be beneficial to the community as well. So yeah.
The one thing I would put out there is, like I mentioned at the beginning, there is not a lot of research when it comes to how immigrant women or racialized women experience intimate partner violence and services that are there to meet their needs. And so I'd put it out there, if there are any registrants who are in the research and policy field, or students. I did my work, my thesis as a student, an MSW student. So if they're students, this is a really good topic to continue to build on the existing studies and research that are out there. And because we need the information. We don't want for so many women to be absent from the literature and to be absent in terms of having their needs met. And so that's the one thing I'd put out there. Yeah.
Thank you.
I just want to share that about intimate partner violence. When I was living up north and somebody told me that I was getting abused, I told them I wasn't. I was in denial. And I was married to my first husband for 7 years, and every day I was hit for 7 years. And I was locked in the house. I couldn't go outside, and he took the phone cord with him to work. I was isolated, and food was withheld from me. I slept on the floor with no clothes on in the wintertime, and I still denied I was being abused. And see how women still deny that they're being abused. I was one of them because I loved him. I loved him and I wanted to be with him. He was my husband. And that's how women are, that's how women are, because they love their partner no matter what. But I want to tell the registrants, the woman that you are working with, be careful when they come to you, because when the person who approached me wasn't a social worker, but a community member asked me if I was being abused. She was very careful and helped me get out of the reserve. She wasn't from the reserve, but from out of the reserve, and she helped me get out of the reserve, me and my 2 kids. And I wouldn't have left. I would probably be dead. And so just be very careful when somebody says they need help, because I told, she approached me and asked me, and I told her, no, I'm not being abused. I had a black eye. I told her, no, I'm okay. I have a good marriage. And so I would just say, careful. And help them. Maybe, by approaching them, you'll save somebody. You'll save a life. So that's what I wanted to share. And that's what I try to do with my work. I try and help save a life. And as a social worker, I've had lots of people from the north that called me that say they want to commit suicide. So I would call the police and tell them, go check on this person, because I don't want them to, commit suicide. So that's one of the things I try and do, is help save a life. So that's what I want to share. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, Bernice. Bernice had said something that prompted something for me. She said being present. So being that active listener, being okay with silence, not stopping people from crying, because that was a teaching that was just given to me. When somebody's crying, we're helpers. We want to go up and hug. And sometimes people don't want to be touched. We don't know if they want that. Or even having the hand on the shoulder. Let them be. Let them feel that, because that is the first stage in healing. So never to stop that. And again, just be present, that active listener, and follow through and do what you say you're going to do. Be there, be consistent, and be patient, because it doesn't always work the first time. My gosh.
That was powerful. And I want to thank all of you very much for being part of our panel today. This is a huge topic. And of course, I think that we've just sort of, introduced to it, that there's much more that we could have talked about today as well. It's clear that this is a systemic issue, that there's no easy fixes, but also that our registrants can really play a major role in helping clients and supporting them when they are experiencing intimate partner violence, and that they need to provide that, that ethical and competent care. And so I really appreciate all of you for being here today and sharing your knowledge and your experience and your wisdom with us. So I appreciate that. I'm now going to shift over to question time. And I'd ask that attendees please submit their questions through the chat feature on the right-hand side of the session page in the virtual portal. Goodness me. We'll do our best to answer as many questions as time permits. And we thank you for your understanding if we can't get to all of the questions today. In order to accommodate questions from as many registrants as possible, we'd ask that you please limit yourself to one question per registrant. So thank you for your understanding. Sarah?
Thank you, Christina. And I thought I would share, before getting into the questions that have been coming throughout today's panel discussion, is just the level of engagement going on in the chat. The panel members don't necessarily have their laptops with them to see the chat going on, but it's been a lot of really great notices of appreciation, comments, just to share a few, saying thank you for being so client-centered. And in particular, Bernice, for sharing your insight and lived experience. Also a comment as well to Darrell, noting that one of the individuals, one of the registrants, recently did their MSW thesis on this topic, and that their experience of immigrant women in accessing IPV support services, and that they did find the same results. And thank you for sharing that information today. I think I'm going to start off with a question that I believe may be relevant to Karishma and Catherine for IPC. In the law, is there a determination between bodily and psychological harm? Maybe if you can provide a little bit more information about that.
Sure. So I think this question is referencing the specific provision of PHIPAA I read aloud. That's section 40, subsection 1. The wording of it is just reducing a significant risk of serious bodily harm. That's the wording in the law, and unfortunately there haven't been a lot of what's called PHIPAA decisions, like things that come out of our tribunal interpreting this. So there's not a huge body of case law, administrative case law, about what exactly serious bodily harm means. So short answer, no, there's not that distinction in the language of PHIPAA.
Thank you for that. There's a question around whether or not someone might be able to speak a little bit about safety planning when shelters are full, and people are returning back to an unsafe situation? What are some tactics or ways that can be navigated?
It's a tough one. For us, what we have done is we utilize family and implement family into the safety plans, whether they're staying with family or family's the one to call should there be an issue. The other thing that we have to, because we have to be creative when shelters are full, we look externally outside of our community, but that too has to go from shelter to shelter, unfortunately, right now. So it would be accessing both shelters locally first, and then the shelters would then have to access in around the district. So they would make that shelter to shelter transfer given the fact that they're full. We try to avoid using hotels or motels or things along those lines just because the risk factors are very much still present. But at times that has been ways that we've gone around that as well.
Do you want to add anything? Same? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Yeah, similar. Utilizing family or informal supports is critical. Built into my intake and consent forms, it's mandatory that they provide an emergency contact, and it provides a lot of information when they don't include their partner as the emergency contact or next of kin, and so that already is kind of prompting you to ask more questions about that. So really exploring with them what their networks, are like, whether it's family or close friends, and what they may reasonably have access to in the community. Yeah.
Such an interesting point that the assessment starts even with the intake form.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. Who's included and who's not.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you.
There are some comments and questions around issues in northern communities, and that is the practice of what this individual's noted as banned council resolutions, in which a person can be, quote, banned from their own community, and that this can occur if that person is viewed as a troublemaker, which may include allegations. Wondering if someone wants to comment on that. And just to note as well that there were some discussions in the chat around that piece, that it's actually quite applicable to immigrant women as well, with one registrant noting that South Asian women also face stigma around that piece.
You would have to do something very bad to be banned.
Yeah.
But I don't think domestic violence is one of them. Unless you're not from that community, if you're from a different band, then I think that is one of the first things they would do is ban you. But if you're from the same band, then they won't do it. Yeah. So.
Do you have anything to
And I think the reason and it's sad that it's being put that way, but you're absolutely right. It would have to be something extremely significant in order to be BCR'd from a community. And the reason why I believe that this is looked at that way and viewed that way is because even the abusers, in the eyes of a lot of community members, they're abused as well. They've also experienced residential, the effects of colonialism in residential schools. And as communities, we want to help each other. Right? So, and I think that's where the perspective of it has to be something extremely significant to be BCR'd is coming from. So again, very difficult.
Yeah.
In the case of immigrant women, yes, it's that tightrope that we have to walk with clients, because we want to be able to support them, but we don't want them to not have the community supporting them. And so it's this delicate balance, and it's a constantly being open and constant negotiation with clients about what's safe for you, what is most meaningful for you at this time, while still trying to maintain community. It's really difficult. It's not an easy place to be in, but then that's the nature of the work that we do, and it's really about walking alongside clients always in their journey. It may take time, but they may come to a point where they are recognizing their own readiness to connect with other communities and to find value and meaning in that.
Thank you for that and for that clarification as well. We appreciate it. There are quite a few questions around the IPC guide, and I know, Karishma, you had noted encouraging registrants who are taking part of today's educational forum to reach out about providing feedback to the guide. Are you able to maybe just clarify, is there an email address that they should be contacting you, or how to go about doing that?
Yeah, sure. So thanks for the interest. I do appreciate that. So currently we're drafting the full tool. So in 2024, we plan to start our second round of consultations. So if you are interested in providing feedback, reach out to myself directly, and of course Catherine as well. My email address is karishma.firdausi@ipc.on.ca. Christina, please feel free to share the email address with the registrants. I would love for people to reach out, to have a conversation with me, provide me your perspective on how social service workers can, have their perspective included in the tool. I think the tool will certainly benefit. Our office would benefit from that dialogue as well. So please reach out. Would you appreciate that?
And to be clear on where we are in the process, as Karishma said, we're drafting it. And then if you do reach out, what we would be sharing would be a draft. And we wouldn't be publishing it on our website yet. We would be sharing that draft for people's review and feedback. And then the next step would be finalizing the draft into the nice, pretty document that we would put on our website in both English and French. So you would be getting an advanced look at where we're headed. So you can let us know if we're going off course or something like that. So we can course correct and take into account people's feedback as, real practitioners.
So just so you know, Christian, we're going to be sending out an email to registrants later today. So it's okay if we include your email in there? Excellent.
Yes, please. And Catherine's as well, of course.
Fantastic. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. There was a question earlier on during the discussion panel wondering if you ever establish women's discussion groups on abuse in your communities so that these women don't feel so alone, to help give them strength. This approach has worked and helped with Southeast Asian women's groups, for example. So just wondering maybe from Marilyn, Bernice, and Darrell as well.
Well, through Onwa, we do a lot of sharing circles. We offer that one-to-one peer support, and we do have goals for some of the more recent programs to have the survivor-led programs. It's a vision that we have. We haven't quite made it there yet, but it is something that's being thought of, because we know those who have survived abuse or survived any form of trauma and have overcome make the best helpers or the best listeners.
So what I tell the women, if they want to get involved, there's NAN. They can get, NAN has Anishinaabe Nation, and that's who we belong to. And then they could get services from them. NAN has women groups, and then NAN travels up north, and there's all different tribal groups. There's KO, Kiwetnug Okumakanak, and there's Matawa, and then what else is there? Manan overseas, and there's KO, and there's Matawa.
Znokiwan.
And then for up north, there's we don't belong to anybody. I'm Sandy Lake, so Sandy Lakes, they have all these tribal councils, Shubugama and IFNA. So they all run their own programs, and women can take, anybody can go to their programming. They can access it. They travel to communities, so they can all access all their programming from there. Then when they have programs, and I tell my clients to access those, because they go to the communities, or they can come to Thunder Bay. So that's what I tell them to do.
Mm-hmm. There's also Talk for Healing too, which is another important. It's a line through Beandigan Safe House where women can call to get that support via telephone if they need somebody just to talk to or do the safety planning or crisis planning as well.
Mm-hmm. And then they have that Nan Hope
as well.
Hope,
yep.
24-hour crisis line. I don't think it's 24 hours anymore, but I think it's till midnight.
Okay.
You can call. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't facilitate groups myself, but I do connect with colleagues who do, and I specifically find myself in networks and groups so that really address the needs of racialized women. And so, because there are not very many groups that are specific to racialized women. There are a number of them, but certainly, for example, I'm Afro-Caribbean, and so to help build that safety, a lot of women who would want to gravitate to a group that looks like them. Same thing for other cultural groups, and so I'm always putting feelers out for different groups and workshops that could support groups. I don't facilitate them myself, but I am always connecting with people who may know about them or facilitate them.
And another thing too, sorry, that I just want to throw out there too, is with On One, a lot of Indigenous community and Indigenous service providers, is we offer a lot of programming which is land-based. So it's open to public, it's open to everybody. So people come together, women, survivors of all walks of life come together, and just being out on the land and naturally having that healing component right there, and just allowing for free conversation and building relationships with people who have experienced a lot of the same things perhaps. And you get that through conversation and being out on the land and having that opportunity to heal.
And we've mentioned this before already, but can you define ONWA for us?
Ontario Native Women's Association, yes. And it's provincial, so I encourage participants as well to reach out and check out our website, onwa.ca.
Thank you. We still have a number of questions, but we are running out of time. So I think we can maybe just take one or two more, perhaps. So this may be one of the last questions. But we have a registrant just looking to the panel group to discuss very briefly the role of community leaders, religious figures, and influencers in promoting awareness and providing support to women facing abusive relationships.
Well, again, I think it's about using our voices, talking about it, that education, getting out and, because like you said, a lot of the women that you work with, they don't even realize that they're being abused. They don't know what the signs are. It's something that's been hushed for so long. And now, women are starting to claim their voices back and saying this is enough. We need to start talking about this. And when we think about Indigenous people, it was something that you didn't talk about, like Bernice shared. It was shunned upon. You don't talk about that. That's your private business. People don't need to know that. So it's getting away from those old norms and, using culture and education and talking about it and educating our younger generations to come. Healing is a lifelong process, especially with Indigenous people and what we've experienced. So that's my thoughts on that.
Yeah, for sure, their support is critical. It's using their power for good, and so the support for sure is critical. But one thing I think is worth noting is how important it is to center the needs of victims and survivors, because in a position of power, the focus can be placed on the person who is in power, and not necessarily on the needs of those who really need the support. And so even though their influence is critical in raising awareness and garnering support, that attention has to be put on the survivors and what their needs are.
They're the experts.
Exactly. Yes.
Thank you so much for this. And again, a lot of really positive comments, thanking every panel member today on a really insightful and vulnerable discussion. So I'll pass it back over to Christina. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And so this concludes the 2023 Educational Forum. And on behalf of the college, I'd like to thank all of our panelists, Krishma, Catherine, Darrell, Bernice, and Marilyn. Thank you so much for being here today and for our insightful discussion. I know myself, I've been both educated and honored to participate and to listen to all of you today, so thank you. And I'm sure that our registrants share that same sentiment, so thank you again. And thank you as well to everyone who watched the discussion today. I hope you were able to make the most of our virtual event. I'd like to remind attendees that you will receive an email later today asking you to complete a post-event feedback form to share your experience of the event. And once you have completed the feedback form, you'll have access to a link to the certificate of participation for your records. Thank you all so much. Take good care.